I would think you might. Okay, one does. Two, it's not all that popular, but it is used. But to me, this was interesting because I'm on Genesis 27, verse 30. That's about where we'll start, pick up 2 or 3 minutes here to bring us up to date. But it said, it came to pass as soon as Isaac, I think probably they would pronounce that Isaac. As soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, he was scarcely stepped out of the room or the house, and in comes Esau. And when I read that, I thought, wouldn't you know it? I mean, just barely finished and got out of the way. And I imagine a sigh of relief came over Jacob. Real sigh of relief came to Rebekah, who had put forth this very deceptive plan. And Isaac had fallen for it. And now in comes Esau. So Esau came in, verse 31. He had the meat all prepared for Daddy because Isaac had requested it. I'd like for you to go get your bow and arrow, go hunting, and bring me some deer meat, some good old-fashioned venison. Well, Isaac said to his son, "Who art thou?" And he said, "I am Isaac, thy son, thy firstborn. I am thy son, thy firstborn, Esau." When I saw the next verse, I remembered way back in 1957, probably one of the first tests that I had when I was at Abilene Christian, Bible test. Had a whole series of just one answer type, just fill in the blank. And I remember the question was, where do you find this statement made in the Bible? And the statement was G-O. That's all. Nothing before, nothing after, just G-O. So I thought, oh, well, I'll get this one easy, Go teach all nations. No, he didn't want anything other than just the word G-O, not teach all nations. Where does it say go? You know what the answer to that was? New Testament, you know what the answer to that was? When Jesus was here on earth, and he cast some demons out, and there was a bunch of animals out here. And when he cast them out, he cast them into the hogs or the pigs. And he told them, go. And they went into the pigs. And then they ran into the water and all of them drowned. New Testament incident, only one word was used, and that's what he wanted. I don't think anybody in class got it. But I thought back, this flashback came to me, verse 32, verse 33. Isaac trembled when his son Esau identified himself, and he said, who? Where do you find the word who used? Well, right here, one word, who, but it says a lot. He wanted some clarification. You just said, I am your son Esau. And then he said, who? I mean, he was befuddled. if you're Esau, who was the one that brought me this meat that I've already eaten and enjoyed and thought it was venison? Well, it was all part of the trick that Rebekah had come up with and gotten Jacob to take part. Now, Esau heard the words of his father in verse 34. This is something that struck me as interesting. Here is a very evidently on the wild side young fellow, not very religiously minded, used to taking care of himself. Nobody told him what to do and so on. He was that kind of a person. And then you find him in verse 34 crying. I mean, here you are, strong, able, huntsman, hunter, and he's crying exceedingly, a bitter cry. Father, don't you have a blessing for me? Verse 36, he said, that brother of mine, Jacob, is rightly named, isn't he? He has supplanted me. He wasn't talking about grabbing hold of his, in that birth process, you remember? Esau was the firstborn, and just evidently a few seconds later, Jacob was born. But in the birth process itself, Jacob's little hand was on Esau as Esau was being born. Interesting, but that's not what he had in mind here. Esau said he has stepped in and taken advantage. He has supplanted me. He took my birthright and also my blessing. They're two separate things. And then he said, Dad, don't you didn't you save any blessing for me? Isaac had already gone through the ceremony. He had given the paternal blessing, Abraham, to this son, Isaac. And then Isaac said, Esau, behold, I have made him your Lord, Jacob. Now, please keep in mind what he's doing here. The father, Isaac, is telling the firstborn, he's saying, look, Esau is one that has received the blessing here, and I have given to him your help for his servants. Corn and wine have sustained him. I mean, what can I do for you now, son? I've given it all to Esau, your brother. And his father said, just one blessing, verse 38, my father, bless me even now, O my father. He lifted up his voice and he wept. This was a very tearful episode that evidently went on for a while. And then Isaac answered and said, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. The very same words, people, very same words that were used in blessing Jacob. He now uses these same words in the blessing to Esau, according to most versions. Remember last week I mentioned to you that King James has the blessing exactly the same in English. You'll have the fatness of heaven, the dew coming down from heaven, and the fatness of the earth. Whenever you plant things, it's going to grow abundantly. And now the same thing is said to Esau. So why then will the King James show that it was the same words exactly, but the American Standard Version says, look in the footnote down here. And it says it's something different. What it says in the footnote is, behold, thy dwelling shall be away from the fatness of the earth and away from the dew of heaven. And yet it's exactly the same in Hebrew for both boys. How can that be? I bring this up because somebody may throw it in your face one of these days and say, well, you can't trust the Bible. I mean, it says one thing here, and well, the American Standard Version is the New American Standard Version is even more bold when it says in translation of verse 39, behold, thy dwelling shall be away from the fatness of the earth and away from the dew of heaven from above. So they added the words away from when it's talking about Esau, but he doesn't say away from, in English at least, when he's talking to Jacob. If you happen to read, and you probably will one of these days, but I want you to know that there is an issue here, even though both in Hebrew are exactly the same, yet translated differently. Why? In study of language, especially in Greek, I know a lot more about that than I do Hebrew, but I know that in Greek, when you have a certain ending, like you tell what a word means by looking at the ending or the suffix of it. For example, the word pneuma, spirit, is used abundantly in the New Testament. And a lot of times it is pneumati, which is called dative case. But the same word, spelled exactly the same, can be looked at differently. How? Now, here's the answer. Don't ever forget it. Because of the context in which it is written. The context is dominant here. If the grammar is exactly the same word for word, what do you go by? You don't have anything left except context. Back to the word spirit, pneumati. It can be either dative case, that is to or for whom something is done. It can be instrumental case, by whom something is done, or it can be locative case, location, in whom something is done. And how do you know which one it is? Because in the Greek, it's exactly the same spelling. How do you know which one? The only answer to that is the difference between these, the differentiation or the distinguishing between one form or another is only accomplished when you get down to look and read the context. Okay, what does the context tell us here in Hebrew? Well, it can be either what we call partitive, or it can be what we call verse 39, privative, P-R-I-V-A-T-I-V-E, or partitive, P-A-R-T-I-T-V-E. That simply means that it can be, you will know or enjoy the fatness of heaven. Okay, that's what one of them says. The other one says, you will know that which is away from heaven. It all is determined not by the writing, not by which case it is, because they're all the same case. So how is it determined? Finally, it is the authoritativeness of the context takes dominance over all these other issues. What is the context here? The father, Isaac, is talking to both boys, apart from each other, obviously, but first he was talking to Jacob. You're going to receive the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven, of. But to Esau, he says the same words in Hebrew, but now it means what you're going to have is away from the fatness of heaven and away from the dew and so on. Just the opposites. And it's the same wording in the original. So that being the case, remember, you've got to see what the context is. What is the context? He is showing the difference between what he gives Jacob and what he gives Esau. Now, let's read it and see. Esau, verse 38 says, Dad, don't you have but one blessing for me, my father? Bless me also, my father. He lifted up his voice and he wept, and Isaac answered and said to Esau, Behold, your dwelling shall be away from the dew of heaven, or shall be of. Which is it? King James says it's of. The New King James says away from. And yet the wording is exactly the same in the original. So what do you have? You've got those two boys, and he's distinguishing between those two boys. One of them is going to have the blessings. The other is going to be away from those blessings. He's not going to receive the same thing exactly. So what does he mean when he goes ahead and he says, by the sword you're going to live, and you're going to serve your brother? What's the context? The difference between those blessings for the two boys. You're going to serve your brother, not vice versa. Not only that, it'll come to pass that when you shall have dominion, that thou shalt eventually break the yoke off of your neck. He's not talking about them individually. He's talking about descendants. His descendants are going to rule over your descendants, Esau. There is a difference between those two boys and the blessing that they receive. So he's talking about the descendants, and he tells them that you're going to be away from the fertile, rich soil that's well-watered and so on, the well-watered places. You're going to be away from those. Well, that's exactly what you find when you read about where Edom is. Edom is south of Jerusalem, quite a bit south, but it's an arid, rocky type area, soil. It's not going to be like Edom had, his brother Jacob had. So the Edomites later on would live in violence and be subjected to Israel, or Jacob's descendants, of course. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and the Israelites were all his followers, or his descendants. So the Edomites then remained primarily independent until the time of David, the king. We're talking now about 1,000 years. But then they are going to be subjected to, as a nation, under him, under David, and then eventually they're going to just evaporate. They're not going to exist anymore as a separate nation of Edom, the Edomites. That's the unhappy story of Esau and his descendants. Then, chapter 27, let's look at verse 41. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father had blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. So this tells me that even the son thought the same thing. Isaac said, I don't know the day of my death. None of us know the day of our death either, but I know one thing, and I'm a lot closer to death than the young people in class back here, simply because of the age factor. Now, that's not ruling out the fact that there accidents can happen and a young person can be killed in a car wreck. I understand all that, but young people usually they're looking forward to another 70 years of living or more. But when you reach 80 years of age, like some people, how much longer do we have to live? Rule of thumb, that's what we're talking about here. Look at the averages. Okay, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Dad's going to be dead. He's going to be dying shortly. Well, that's what Isaac thought too, but Isaac was wrong. He lived until he was 180 years old. So he had another 40 or 50 years yet to live. But he thought he was going to die. Point, verse 41, that's exactly what Esau thought too. Dad's days, he's going to be dying, and the days of mourning will be here. And when those days of mourning, Dad's death are over with, then that's when I am going to kill or murder Jacob. Here he was already planning to murder his own brother, sort of like Cain killed Abel. Way back to the beginning. And these words of Esau, the older brother, were told to Rebekah, the mother of both boys, Jacob and Esau. And when she found out, she sent word for Jacob to come to her. And then she said, look, Jacob, your brother, Esau, regarding you now, as touching thee, he does comfort himself with the fact that he's going to kill you later. You're not going to be taking advantage of him. He's going to kill you later. I want you to know this, Jacob. Now this is Rebekah, the mom, talking to him. Here's her advice, verse 43. Now look, son, obey my voice and arise and flee to Laban, your uncle, my brother, who lives up in Haran, and stay with him a few days. Now, underline that, a few days. These people were getting all wrong in trying to figure out how long something is going to take. You know what that few days turned out to be? 20 years. But she says, you need to get out of here right now and quickly and flee to your uncle, my brother, up in Haran. For how long? Until your brother's anger subsides. She thought that he's going to get over it. That's his nature, maybe. And after a few days, his anger is going to go down. And that's when I will send for you and tell you to come on back. It's safe. Verse 45, I will send and I'll fetch you from there. And then she says, why should I be deprived of both you boys, Jacob and Esau, in one day? And Rebekah says to her husband, Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth, the Hittites. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of these Hittites, such as these that are my daughters of the land. She had two daughters-in-law that Esau had married, and they were a constant source of irritation to her. I think we're safe in saying that one of the primary reasons was because they were idolaters, and her boy, Jacob and Esau, had been raised differently. They believed in God. My daughters-in-law don't. Does it make a difference? I mean, how many times do young people who they're dating each other, they get to be pretty serious, they get to be thinking this might be my companion for life, and then they love that individual, boy or girl, whichever the case may be. So the girl says, he'll make a good father. Or maybe if it's the boy, then the girl will make a good mother. Do they look that far ahead, or do they primarily think this is the one that I love right now? Which is supreme? Which is really looking at the situation in life and what might be later on? I used to tell my children, don't just look at the present time. Ask yourself the question, where might this lead? Before you get into an action of some sort. If it's questionable, ask yourself, where can this lead? How's it going to end up? But they usually don't pay that much attention. They just love that person so much they know everything's going to be all right. Well, that was part of the problem that she had with her daughters-in-law. She had the problem, though. Esau didn't think that was much of a problem. But that verse 46 is a very, very up-to-date issue in today's world, like it has been for the last 3,000 years. So now Esau is making a resolve. He is going to murder his brother as soon as Dad dies. Assuming that his father was indeed at the point of death, which he wasn't, but that was what he thought. So, as I said, her, quote, few days, end quote, for you to stay over there at Haran and Laban, my brother's house, turned out to be 20 years. So this means that as far as the record in the Bible goes, listen, as far as the Bible has record for us, she never saw Jacob again in her life. Her strategy proved to be very costly. But, and here's the kicker, it would have been worse had Esau actually killed his brother, wouldn't he? I mean, put yourself in the sandals of Rebekah and Esau and Jacob. And I do this all the way 3 or 4 times a week as I take a look at some of this material that we're studying. How would I respond? How would I act? Well, Esau did pretty soon, pretty rapidly. He forgot about his anger with his brother. He began to prosper in a physical sense, materialistically, and that's the main thing, people. That's the main thing he cared about, not so much the promised blessings and the birthright. What he really cared about was things, acquiring things. So Isaac then gave Jacob his sincere blessing and instructed him, now watch this. Now he says, Isaac does to Jacob, marry a woman of our own people. She had in mind Laban's children, a cousin then. Marry one of your cousins, Jacob. Don't marry a Canaanite like Esau did. Genesis 28, verses 1 through 4. Now that's Isaac talking now. So we don't know when Rebekah died, but we do know from Genesis 49, over at the end of the book, verse 30 and 31, we do know that she was buried in the cave of Machpelah along with Abraham and Isaac and Sarah. We put Rebekah there in the cave of Machpelah also. So she, at least we know she died, but it's not recorded exactly when that was. Now Esau should have secured a wife from his parents' people to start with. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact he knew what God wanted, and he knew what his mom wanted too. And Isaac was not the leader as a father should have been, and he led to Esau's presumption. It didn't make that much difference who you marry, even if it's 2 Canaanite women. And as a result of that marriage, what did that do to Esau? He became further and further and further away from God and allowed his wives to affect his religion. Now, if you think that's true regarding this guy's two wives, Esau had 2 wives, idolaters. Go on down in time to the time of Solomon now, king after David. How many wives did he have? How many concubines did he have? Do you think that those women affected his spirituality? Bound to. I mean, this is information that we ought to be thinking about when we're talking to our children when they begin the dating process. It didn't work out very well for Isaac because he evidently didn't take the leadership role here like he should have. And as a result, his wife thought, I need to take care of this problem. So it was Rebekah insisting that the son, she said, in fact, my life's not going to be worth living. If he married 2 Canaanites and married away from a godly person like he should have. The point is, Esau knew what the statement made to Jacob was all about. Didn't seem to matter too much to him. He married these two women, and he's not through getting married, as we're going to see in just a little bit. Okay, chapter 28. Isaac called Jacob, blessed him, gave him a charge, and said what he should have said in the beginning now. What he said was, "You shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan." Where were you, Isaac, when all this problem was going on? Did you go along with your wife, who was right on this occasion and on this question? And then he says, Jacob, this is his dad telling him, Isaac. Isaac says, Jacob, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. Rebekah and Laban were brother and sister. And God Almighty bless thee and make you fruitful and multiply, that thou mayest be a multitude of people later. And also give the blessing of Abraham to you, Jacob. Follow the line now. This was God, as I said numerous times, behind the scenes, through providence, working his will, even though sometimes some of his people can be very antagonistic. And may God give the blessing to Abraham, to you, and to your seed, Jacob, that you can inherit the land that you're a stranger in, the same promise that God gave to Abraham. So Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went up there to Padan Aram, unto the house of Laban, son of Bethuel, the Syrian. Now we're getting another little hint. Geographically speaking, this area is about 500 miles north and east, but primarily north, up here to Haran. So he sends Jacob away up to the relatives of his wife. And Esau left. It's interesting, I think, that we're going to see Esau. Well, look at verse 6. Esau saw. Say that twice. And see, you have to watch your tongue get tangled up. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob. Well, he probably saw a lot more too that he didn't allow to affect him. But he sent him away to Padan Aram, and to take a wife from there. As he blessed him, he gave him a charge, you shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Jacob obeyed his father and mother. They were united on this, finally. And he left for Padan Aram, about 500 miles, primarily north. But it's an area that's later called Syria, north of Israel. And so then went Esau to Ishmael. Uncle Ishmael. Interesting. And he took unto the wife that he took another wife, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of you name it, pronounce it for yourself. And he took this woman to be his wife. So it's a rather belated attempt, but he is trying, partially, he's trying to correct the situation. So he goes to Uncle Ishmael, who, now he'd already died, he's going to his offspring, and he's going to get one of the daughters as a wife. I guess he thought this will be more suitable than the first two that I married, so he's going to marry a third time. You know, third time's a charm. So he's going to take a third wife, and the problem here is his blindness and stubbornness, even though some of it had been overcome. It's an important decision to make sure you marry an appropriate companion. So now he's making one desperate attempt to regain the favor of mom and dad and marry again. But in this, he was still wrong. Why? Because Ishmael and his descendants had already been cast out by God. So you could almost see him saying, oh, mom and dad didn't like the first two that I married. I'll marry again and marry somebody that they like. Wrong, wrong, wrong. He fouled it up again and married of the seed of Ishmael. So it's probably true, I'm guessing probability here, but it's probably true that he realizes by now that all of my problems are not all caused by Jacob. In other words, maybe my decisions were not the best. And so at this point, I think, at this point, his hatred for Jacob begins to mellow somewhat. Though 20 years later, they finally meet. We'll pick that up next week. Thanks for being here.